Great. Thanks, Rennie, for the introduction. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. So the long requested blockchain and healthcare research. We're going to cover and start from the macro environment to the actual technology and what it enables. And then we're going to go look more specifically and practically in what the technology might enable immediately, a bit further out, and then moonshots that'll probably happen on a much longer time span. And then we'll end with some closing thoughts and we'll open it up to some questions. Before we start, I just want to get a poll. How many of you are currently working on a blockchain project? So we're going to run a poll function quickly, and if you can just answer the prompt on the screen, just give you a minute or so to answer. I'm just curious to see sort of what the audience levels are like right now. So it'll just take, 10, 15 more seconds, and then we can answer. All right, get your last votes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's take a look. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so this is about what I thought it would be like, and I hope for the people that are here to learn that this is helpful. Okay, great. So why don't we get started? So we're going to start talking a little bit about blockchain at a more macro scale. So one question is, why do we even need blockchain in healthcare? Well, for one, people are upset that they have no governance over their data. This can manifest itself in third parties using it or profiting from it without their consent or giving them any of the upside, or it can manifest itself in not being able and readily accessible for when you need your records or have to corral them from several different places. We're also starting to see huge issues with centralization. So massive data breaches like Anthem, or crippling entire systems for ransomware like the WannaCry virus and the NHS. In the future, there'll be more cybersecurity issues with connected devices. So we want to make sure that only the right people have access and can manipulate that data, and we have a trail leading to whoever accessed it and when. So now the question becomes, how can a blockchain help that? I thought this was a great way to describe the difference between a blockchain and a regular database. There are no conflicts, you can't go back and edit things, the owner holds access rights, and the rules are decided without a middleman. But it's important to remember that a blockchain is really just another name for a type of database, but these are some of the features of it. On our research page, you can read our entire What is Blockchain primer to understand how this works fully. But in essence, a decentralized ledger is one where if two parties want to transact, a bunch of different nodes record that transaction taking place. So this makes it hard to falsify records, and it makes the record available in more places. Plus, if the rules are established by everyone beforehand, you can theoretically remove the middle person that usually decides and enforces the rules and then takes a piece of the transaction in the process. Blockchain systems are also append-only. You can only add to them. They're time-stamped, and like we said, hard to forge. And then when transactions happen, they get bundled together into a block and then verified and then added to the end of the chain. Again, all of this is explained in detail in our What is Blockchain primer, but it's the attributes of blockchain that are going to be important to know as we go through this presentation. So things to remember are rules are decided by the network. You can only add things. They're time-stamped. And one of my favorite parts is that it actually puts access rights of the data into the hands of the owner. So blockchain uses something called public-private key cryptography, which isn't super important to know technically, but a good analogy is think about your public key or your public address as your mailbox. So people can send things to it, but only the person with the key can actually read it. So this gives the data owner the rights and ability to send the data wherever they choose to do it. So, for example, if Facebook wanted to send your data somewhere, you have little say because you don't actually own it. But in a blockchain-based system, you get those those access and sending rights. One thing that's important to remember is that an actual blockchain is actually within a subset of different types of technology. So a blockchain is great when you don't trust the third parties to control the database. But the reality is that not all projects actually need a blockchain. In fact, Really, when people say blockchain, they mean different types of ledgers, which are viewable or editable by people with permission. So this graph gives a sense of all the criteria you'd need to meet a blockchain, for a blockchain to be a reasonable solution. But there are different types, like distributed ledgers and more. The reason this is important is because blockchain technology is not a cure-all for every problem. It has trade-offs just like any other technology or database structure. So we've talked a lot about the benefits in the last few slides, and I've laid most of them out here. But there are obstacles too. So notably, healthcare has a whole set of regulations around patient privacy. Most of the stakeholders in the current system do not want a lot of things that the blockchain enables, like interoperability, and we don't even have data standards yet. Plus, from a technical standpoint, blockchain systems have not yet shown ways to effectively scale and are really expensive to store data on because you have to make duplicate copies across the ledger. And plus, what you gain in being able to trust untrusted parties, you lose in the form of speed. But there are improvements happening to focus on the downsides. So for example, FHIR, pronounced FHIR, is creating data standards to be used through the system, which is a necessary starting point. This slide is pretty technical, but you don't need to worry too much about the details. But there are two really cool cryptography/computation techniques that are being explored, where essentially you can use personally identifiable data in computation, but not actually reveal the identifiable data to the party that requests to use it. So super cool. If you're interested, you can read the papers that are linked, but solutions are being worked on to find ways to use data, use private data without actually exposing a lot of it. And then on the scalability front, people are exploring how a blockchain can interact with non-blockchain systems to bring the best of both worlds. So one example is to just record the transactions that occur on the blockchain and then actually store the data itself, either in regular data repositories or in smaller pieces across a few different players. And then when you're ready to retrieve it, the ledger notes the last transaction and where the data is stored. And using that public-private key cryptography we talked about, you can give the records to whoever requests it. So that's it on the technical front. Hopefully you're still with me. On the more macro front, we've seen a lot of companies launch initial coin offerings, ICOs. Where companies basically offer tokens of their company to be bought. Some of these tokens can be used on the applications that actually give them out, so similar to a token at a carnival or something, and some are just totally separate and look more like securities. It's all a very legal gray area, but these have been really hot through all of last year, but we've slowly seen them decline as the crypto enthusiasm sort of wears off. There were a ton of projects that raised a lot of money in this time, and importantly, a lot of companies that are building the infrastructure layer of crypto and blockchain raise a lot of money. So these infrastructure pieces like distributed storage and wallets are key for an actual decentralized app ecosystem later, but even these projects are super early stages. There have also been some healthcare ICOs, which have been smaller in scale and highly volatile. And unfortunately, volatility and healthcare, go together like salt and slugs. Like I said, ICOs have been a legal gray area, but we're starting to see some formation of regulatory frameworks. So, parts of Europe actually have much more open and flexible frameworks for these kind of projects. So, starting to see a lot of companies there. And, for those reasons, plus less competing IT infrastructure and stringent patent privacy laws, we're starting to see some blockchain and healthcare projects look to other countries instead of the US. And as cryptocurrencies start, I'm just going to show you guys really quickly on the platform to show how cryptocurrencies, basically as they were getting hot, a lot of companies started talking about blockchain technology in their earnings transcripts. So here you can see how it got really hot. The drop-off is due to this being this current quarter, which isn't over yet. But if you look through the end of last quarter, you can see that blockchain mentions just go out of control. But if we look a little closer at blockchain and more healthcare-specific applications, so just putting a few terms that might be webbed together to signify healthcare applications, we see that it's definitely way more nascent. Fewer companies are talking about it, but there's a slight uptick at the end, and you can actually, if you click, you can actually see some of the people that are talking about it. So, We'll talk about some of these projects later, but some people are working on claims. For example, we'll be talking about Quest Diagnostics and their consortia with Humana and Optum. So we're starting to see some interest in blockchain technology, but it's way more in sort of a pilot stage and exploratory and task force, etc. But across the board, corporates are starting to invest more heavily. It's mostly in the financial services world. We haven't really seen too many corporates in the healthcare world invest, but you can see the handful that have on the platform itself. Also interesting is that the number of patents being filed around blockchain applications in healthcare has gone up. So we've seen IBM, Walmart, Bank of America, and several others looking at different applications that use blockchain technology in areas like emergency response, compliance, and data sharing agreements. So again, this is from our platform for anyone who's interested. So that's what's been going on today, but where are we in the world of healthcare plus blockchain applications? I'm going to break down where I think we'll start seeing inroads of blockchain into healthcare in the short term, medium term, and longer term level. As we go through, we'll see handling of more sensitive data, more stakeholders and need for scalable solutions, and more control rights given to the patient. So on the first day, God said, let there be short-term applications among a handful of trusted parties that can reduce duplicative administrative work. Since it's day one, most of the projects we see are going to be pilots between a few trusted parties, and they aren't going to get within 10 feet of patient data. Small consortia are starting to pop up. One of the awesome things about distributed ledgers is that if something happens, all of the people in the network can see it updated. So projects like updating provider directories or confirming credentials, which you don't really need 5 separate entities to do, can be shared and the work can be split. So it really just reduces a lot of the overhead needed for this. And in other closed consortia, one of the areas I'm cautiously optimistic is also in the supply chain. So drug counterfeits are a serious problem, and we've seen several horror stories about what happens when goods have to change too many hands or when recalls happen and the source needs to be found quickly. There's a lot of downside risk to bad drugs getting into the system, so we definitely need better tracking systems here. Plus, in the next few years, the U.S. government is mandating that players in the supply chain join interoperable electronic systems that are going to allow them to track each unit throughout the entire supply chain. So this is going to be a tough challenge to do at scale with the existing systems. We're already seeing some projects spawn from this, including Chronicled, which is piloting with several large drug companies and drug supply giants. And it uses a blockchain system which is closed to the entities involved in the chain, and it can track who did what when. And then this is likely going to be augmented by a hardware solution, either from Chronicled or other RFID and temperature logging instruments, to provide more objective sources of data and monitor the goods properly. When you combine the two, you can have systems that more accurately pinpoint when and where something happened, because all the disparate systems are more easily working together and every action is being logged. Each separate entity won't have to figure out its own compliance strategy. As we look to the medium term, we'll start seeing an expanded set of use cases. These projects will move past pilots to being able to introduce more stakeholders and scale. Plus, they'll start dealing with patient data. I don't think this is going to shock anyone, but the back office issues in healthcare are creating massive amounts of overhead, and administration plus the process just moves so slowly, especially for key things like prior authorizations. Think about how many people in the healthcare system whose job it is to get data from point A to point B and just coordinate information, which another party probably already knows. If you restructure the back end and how sort of information flows with the patient at the center and properly tracking and recording what happened to a patient, if you could access that data more quickly, you can move processes along quicker. So this is theoretically, what a restructured system looks like, where the patient at the center who basically controls access rights. PocketDoc has developed a blockchain product to automatically handle the less complex cases by using smart contracts with rules that are decided by parties involved for claims and prior authorizations. And Change Healthcare is doing something interesting too, because they're transacting mostly between known parties with their claims, and everyone is trusted. You can actually scale it better. So they have a system that not only tracks the life cycle of a claim, which can take quite a while, but also process many more transactions and meet that volume demand. So just a reminder, one of the key parts of blockchain technology is that you can have essentially anonymous sources be trusted as third parties, but at the cost of that is you need consensus mechanisms to basically ensure that everyone is sort of doing the right thing and no bad actors are involved. But if you trust everyone in a system, you don't need those same consensus mechanisms in the same way, because every actor is known and trusted, and you can actually scale things and do more things faster because of that. Another medium-term business opportunity we see is institutions within healthcare being able to monetize the data sets they have. So data from institutions is getting more and more valuable, whether that's to train algorithms or find better therapeutic targets or understand where clinical trials should be set up. Existing health players have a lot of data that they can monetize. Right now, creating standards, de-identifying, et cetera, is a whole process. But as standards start proliferating, we can envision a blockchain-based system that might facilitate this. There's a regulatory angle here too, because new laws around consumer data are going to force companies to develop audit trails for where the data goes, which blockchain is well suited for and is a great complementary or starting point to something like a health data exchange. So Health Verity is one of the players in this space, and their consent product actually has users, which is pretty impressive right now. Some projects are trying to bypass exchanges altogether and get patients to use their own data to donate to research. This is probably more likely going to happen in areas like rare diseases, areas where people are more proactive participants in their healthcare, their data is valuable, and their services are expensive. But putting data into a protocol and letting researchers build on top of it can help push research forward. Genomics is going to be a particularly interesting area to watch here, because there's a lot of scrutiny over how this data is now being used with 23andMe and GlaxoSmithKline working together, the Golden State Killer case, which was solved by DNA, life insurers now using this data. Patients want to be protected, and frankly want upside if people are using their rare data, which is really valuable. Plus, DNA, by its nature, is identifiable information by itself. So how that gets treated with patient privacy laws is going to be interesting. Companies are helping people give access controls of their data to different studies they'd be eligible for and getting compensated accordingly. So blockchain can help with the data donation and capture side, but can also help with the design of the studies themselves. This was an interesting paper about improving trial and study design by using smart contracts to ensure no biases occur. I'm sure many people in the research world know that many studies aren't reproducible, they change a lot of criteria, do funny stuff with it, or they just don't publish if the data is negative. So the ability to better design trial protocols and research and ensure no funny business is being done would help everyone. Additionally, it could better help track participants, because if trials were on the same protocol, you could ensure that patients weren't enrolled in multiple trials that might botch the data. And then after the trial, being able to better facilitate data sharing between research institutions and better control who has access to that data is important. We're seeing these massive repositories of data being created with the attention of third-party researchers building layers on top, like Google's Project Baseline or NIH's All of Us project. So controlling consent and access rights for these data sets of real-world evidence is important, and blockchain can help that. But as we talk about data sets, about patients being used, we start thinking about this more out there time frame where patients are the originators and sole controllers of their health records. This is when we start thinking about a system that's more decentralized at the core than just using blockchain applications in different silos. Even though we've seen a lot of decentralized patient record companies, this vision is probably further out than we think. However, it would seriously solve a lot of problems. Think about the amount of duplicated tests done because no master patient records exist. Think about how frustrating it is for everyone involved because data can't easily move from one place to another. One of the biggest bottlenecks to a consumer-driven ecosystem is that patients don't readily have access to or control over their data. Plus, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's a huge issue too. Health records are really expensive and valuable, fines for breaches are massive, and most health record breaches happen because someone misdelivers information like an email or people are nosy. So audit trails of who accessed it when would help prevent that. Patient-owned health records are really only going to be possible when the patient actually generates more data themselves, which is slowly happening thanks to a wave of consumer diagnostics, wearables, genomics, and more. With this data being generated by the patient, it can be captured by the personal record. Decentralized health records would truly be a consumer experience-driven healthcare system for applications built on top of it and want to use that data. So having a master key that lets us send that data means that companies would actually have to compete for access to it. There's still a whole layer to this consumer experience thing involving who's the payer, so I'm not going to go into that and pretend this is a cure to healthcare's ailments. But if data became more liquid and more important part of healthcare, then a decentralized health record means the patient is really at the center. And we've seen announcement of several projects that plan to do this, though have yet to see any real tangible results here, especially because, again, a whole infrastructure layer needs to be built out before we see these kind of applications. Estonia was a well-covered one in the news thanks to their centralized digital identity systems, which we actually don't have in the U.S. So that part of the infrastructure is actually a huge head start. But again, despite the coverage, there still hasn't been a product yet. So it'll be interesting to see if a decentralized health record happens outside of the U.S. in areas like maybe Estonia or India, where that digital identity layer is already built out, and there's just less IT infrastructure to compete with. But once we do have a decentralized patient record, it'll be exciting because then there's sort of room for a whole decentralized application layer that can exist on top of that. Right now these projects are probably too early, but it's something to think about. So I know that we're sort of running out of time, but just some quick parting thoughts. When you think about a blockchain solution, think about what the blockchain problem aims to solve. Can it be done with a traditional database and just structuring the data properly, which I feel like solves 80% of the problems in healthcare? And then think about who needs to be involved or what needs to happen to make this solution viable today. Because right now we're in the part of the hype cycle where you'll literally see a blockchain for anything, like the one you can see here. So really, when you're thinking about these projects, try to keep these questions in mind because I think it'll help guide that, as well as think about the distributed ledger slide we had before to even know if blockchain is the right solution for the project you're trying to tackle. So hopefully that was helpful and not too much to take in. Happy to try and answer as many questions as I can, and if I don't get to them, I'll be answering questions from clients and whoever I can through email afterwards. Okay, let's see. So can you explain how a blockchain-based solution is inherently better than a centrally managed solution with proper governance? So I think I think it obviously depends on the problem set that's being tackled here. One of the issues is that the governance controls are not in the hand. The incentives of the person who has governance controls are not necessarily aligned with the person who is paying for the product or generating the data, etc. So especially in the case of patients, patients basically have almost no say in how their records are being used because they don't have access and governance rights. So it just sort of helps, I think, align incentives for people who are not currently don't currently have the proper leverage in the space. But in certain scenarios, definitely a centrally managed solution would be better for scalability, for speed. But in a lot of cases where, for example, duplicative work might be happening, again, this is sort of, governance given to every person to access and write to the database, but it reduces duplicative work if all the people are doing the same thing, essentially. So, how do you maintain data integrity if consumers own their data? How do you avoid consumers editing and changing their data? I mean, one part of this is you have like oracles of truth. So, for example, wearables or genomic tests, a lot of that are proven, are sort of given the green light by a third-party trusted source, which is the FDA. So, a lot of these are sort of more objective data sets. So, the integrity there is not a huge deal. But in the sense of patients writing to their own database, you can, again, like one of the benefits of blockchain systems is you can see who accesses it and what transactions happen. So if there's something that's sort of sketch or suspect, you can see the source of where it's happening. And again, you can change access rights as you need to. So I think patients are in their own best interest. So it's hard to see why they would purposely mess up their data. If it's accidental, you can sort of you can find an audit trail to see who did what when. What do you see as the compelling event or key motivator to increase adoption of blockchain solutions in healthcare? So I think we've already seen one, which is sort of hype in the space, just sheer attention, mostly due to cryptocurrency prices rising has just made more people aware of the technology and willing to explore the benefits. So that's obviously, so attention is the first layer. And through that, infrastructure will be built out. There's a regulatory component to this. So we talked about personal privacy laws and things that are going to force compliance, which a blockchain system can definitely be of value. And I think another part of this is going to be competitors using these kind of solutions. Maybe not necessarily the large incumbents, but up and coming companies using these solutions to provide a drastically better experiences to consumers or providers or whatever, and then companies basically having to take it more seriously beyond a pilot use case. Let's see. Where do you see the most viable blockchain applications for clinical trials in the short term? I really think just consent and sort of making and sort of understanding which patients are enrolled well or enrolled where at just like a shared protocol for consent and that is pretty low hanging fruit and really really important for, I think, everyone in the clinical trial industry, because you don't want these botched data applications, the botched data sets in your trial. Why is patient data not feasible in the immediate term? So, I think part of this is that you need to get a lot of stakeholders. First of all, you need to get a lot of stakeholders involved, and there's a lot in the existing system that creates the data and sort of hoards the data. So you really have to play ball with the existing EMRs, because they're a very core part of the process today. And the other part is that patients just don't generate enough clinical grade information themselves to sort of be be choosers of their own basically to see their personal health records populated. So this is more of a personal health record question, which we've seen many attempts at this in the past, and nearly all of them have failed because patients just don't input data into their records themselves. This might be the case in certain rare diseases, etc., and we're seeing companies build there. But an ecosystem of decentralized patient records is probably far off, just because people are not engaged in their health in their health regularly. I'll answer like two more, and then we'll just take the rest to email. Let's see. What's the best source to identify who the major players are today? Well, my obvious plug is going to be CV Insights. You can use a lot of the tools that we have for things like patents or earnings call transcripts to see who's talking about what. And you can also see a lot of the early stage companies, who's raised recently, which investors have they raised from, so you can see basically who, which investors are actually interested in the space, etc. So you definitely, I would definitely highly recommend using our tool, obviously. So I'll just take one more. What is your sense of Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft investment in blockchain and healthcare? There's a couple of questions about tech giants, it looks like, in healthcare. Look, for a lot of these companies, I think decentralized applications pose more of an existential threat to their core business. Haven't really seen any of these companies engage much in blockchain in healthcare investment specifically. We do have a research piece out about how they're engaged in blockchain as a whole. There are some interesting applications. So Google's DeepMind division, for example, is developed not a blockchain but more of a distributed ledger of sorts, just to basically show their own compliance with accessing patient records. I think there's a lot of spotlight on all of these companies right now, and so you'll probably see more along the lines of compliance from them and how they're using patient data. But it's really hard to see how a blockchain system would be a really core part of their strategy. So that's all the time I have for right now. But if I didn't get to your questions, please shoot me an email and we can figure it out. Okay, thanks for joining me today. Appreciate it.